my name is Manuel Bernal. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for the Chavez Foundation.
I'm Alfredo Izmajtovich. I'm the Executive Vice President of the Housing and Economic Development Fund for the Cesar Chavez Foundation.
We are going to talk about Cesar Chavez's legacy as it applies to affordable housing. But I will begin by sharing some words about affordable housing development within the Cesar Chavez Foundation and how that came to be. As I understand it, it really was triggered by a sad event really in farm worker history. It started back in the mid-1970s. At that point, the Chavez Foundation was called the National Farm Worker Service Center. And we took on the project of constructing Agbiani Village. Agbiani Village in Delano, California, ended up being a 31-unit affordable housing retirement home, actually, for Filipino farm workers. It was built primarily with sweat equity. Some of you may know that Filipino farm workers were brought to this country in the 1920s and 1930s to work as farm workers, and only men were allowed to come, only men worked in the fields. By the 1970s, these farm workers had reached retirement age. And sadly, no longer able to work. They weren't able to take advantage of farm labor camps or housing. And they had no families to rely on because of the anti-miscegenation laws. So they had nowhere to go. Just a quick side note, anti-miscegenation laws are one of those many disturbing and sad facts of our own nation's history. They prohibited folks from marrying outside of their race. And for Filipino farm workers, since there were no Filipino women to marry, they grew old into their retirement age without any families to support them. So with that being a driver, the National Farm Worker Service Center took on and built Agbiani Village in the mid-1970s, again, 31 units. And that's how housing work began for the National Farm Worker Service Center. Shortly after that, obviously recognizing the value and the benefit of having affordable shelter and being able to provide that for farm families, the National Farm Worker Service Center continued housing work in the Central Valley. By the late 70s, we had acquired a few small multifamily properties in Fresno that we actually later sold because we kind of outgrew them. In the 1980s, we took on probably our biggest project at that point was a major multifamily master plan community. It was in Parlier. We called it La Paz Villa, which consisted of the 81 single-family homes. 81 multi-family homes, hundreds of single-family homes for sale, and commercial space that supported the local merchants. So that took us a few years, and that developed and became a great example of our growing affordable housing development expertise. In the early to mid-1980s, that's when we started doing affordable housing development through the tax credit financing structure. We started with Ross Gardens in Fresno, Saladini Villa in Parlier, and another project in Delano called Casa Hernandez that serves to this day seniors in that area. So that grew. And as our housing work continued to grow, we made an intentional shift to go beyond the Central Valley of California. We started looking at different places to do housing work, and we did more housing in Fresno, more housing in Bakersfield, and we eventually got to San Francisco. You know, this shift took place upon the realization that Latinos in general are the most urbanized minority in the country. Approximately 90% of all Latinos live in urban or suburban areas. So if we wanted to work with Latinos and really represent and move forward Cesar's legacy, we knew we had to be in suburban and urban areas. We also recognized that 75% of Latinos live in the Southwest. Right? California, having the biggest population, followed very closely by Texas, and of course, Arizona, Mexico. So in the early 2000s, we started to branch outside of California. We did our first tax credit projects in Arizona in the early 2000s. We acquired a 600-unit portfolio in New Mexico, an expiring use portfolio where we were able to preserve the affordability. And we also did 3 new construction projects in the Rio Grande Valley out in Texas. So that kept on growing. By the mid 2000s, we upgraded our approach to social services or community services. Before that time, we had, even though the National Farm Workers Service Center had a long history of providing services specifically to our housing families, or our families living in our housing units, were not fully developed. They weren't consistent, and the quality was not as high as it needed to be. So we made an upgrade in 2000s, where we brought in a small army of AmeriCorps volunteers to basically volunteer full time at all of our portfolio sites and provide consistent programming for our properties. We also were able to put in place what we now call our signature program, the Cesar Chavez Learning Centers, that again exist today and are part of all our family developments. And today we have a slightly different model. It was very taxing to recruit so many people, so many full-time volunteers on an annual basis. So we've now shifted to a different model that still allows us to be consistent in terms of educational programming. And then in addition to that, obviously provide support to our families when they need it. Most notably, over the course of the last year, the pandemic has been a great generator of stress for our families, and our community services team has proactively supported those families. The biggest examples being food distributions and vaccinations facilitation for those families. So it's been a lot of growth from that side as well. In 2011, Alfredo Izmajtovich joined the team, and by then we had renamed the National Farm Workers Service Center to the Cesar Chavez Foundation. A lot of housing has been done in the last 10 years, also benefiting families and growing. So I would like to get started and have Alfredo respond. If you can reflect back on the last 10 years, the first 10 years of your tenure here, and maybe talk to us about what you see as most memorable or impactful in the last 10 years.
Sure. So it'd probably be helpful to kind of talk about, me starting with the Cesar Chavez Foundation. I know that I had a meeting with Paul Chavez where he had expressed a desire to really try to ramp up the impacts of the foundation, and specifically in affordable housing. While obviously, as Manuel points out, we had a lot of success growing the affordable housing portfolio. There was this desire to sort of ramp up exponentially the impacts of that work. And so I would like to say, the first few years was looking at our infrastructure, how we were organized, and trying to see if there was ways that we could become more effective and be able to, in effect, create a platform where we could replicate and try to use similar models in different states to build more housing. And happily, a lot of that work resulted in some very good changes in HED. We became a vertically integrated company with construction in-house as well as social services, compliance, and property management. And so that vertical integration really allowed us to control all the levers of development, and allowed us to really focus in on how we could improve our ability to do more business, more deals, and have a greater impact in the communities that we serve. So it was a really a good place, because that foundation had already been built, and we were now building upon that.
Actually, I was going to mention to you that one of the things that I have not mentioned very frequently, but it just goes to show how important your work has been over the last 10 years. When I arrived, right, the housing work was 100% dependent on consultants. The foundation itself did not have any staff that were experienced in any kind of affordable housing work, whether we're talking about actual development, much less construction, property management, compliance. None of that was in place. It was, again, completely dependent on consultants. And even the property management that we had was only servicing half of the portfolio. It hadn't gone beyond California. And it's important to mention, right? Because now we're talking about vertical integration, right? It's huge, but it's something that we don't mention to ourselves often enough, because it does kind of put a magnifying glass on the growth that we've had in terms of structure.
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely accurate. And I would say that we kind of had a skeleton crew when I came on board. We did have some key individuals in different departments. And once we got the plan in place, that organization that we wanted to build, we started to start putting the flesh on the bones and started bringing in some very strong folks who had finance understanding, construction understanding, just the whole development process was something that we wanted to have a really good, strong understanding of that and how we wanted to implement it. And luckily, from those initial projects that we did in the early, 2010s and so forth, we had some really early successes, which was a really good thing. It allowed us to become more visible. And that was the other issue too, is that philosophically, the foundation has always been about do the work and not really talk about the work or toot our horn per se.
Yeah.
And while that's very noble, it's not very good if you want to get the word out that you're doing these types of projects and that you want to do more, and you're willing to partner with other groups to expand that capacity. So luckily, we started to change a little bit, started to be a little more open about working with other groups and getting new partners, both financially and development-wise, that allowed us to access new products, new services, and we were able to enter into a lot of new marketplaces. So we started to expand into new areas that we hadn't been in. We started doing mixed income products and mixed use products. And so HED, which is the development arm of the foundation, really started to become a known player in the affordable housing space, and also in the economic development space as well. Building retail, again, venturing into market rate to facilitate our mission in the affordable, and kind of adding tools to the toolbox, for lack of a better term. We wanted to be able to do different things depending on the needs of the community. And if we were more responsive and nimble, we could be more impactful.
Yeah. Many times, I'm sure you've heard it too, right, is that we seem to be the best kept secret in the affordable housing world. And it's kind of funny, but at the same time, we know that, it has negative implications as well, right? But I think one of the things that makes us very different from other affordable housing developers in this country is that, one, that we have a pretty wide geographic spread. Right, we're handling 4 states, and also we have been able or had to use a whole slew of different affordable housing development tools to get us there. Right, so maybe you can expand a little bit more on, just be a little nerdy and just kind of talk about the different financing tools that we have used in the past to push forward this mission of affordable housing development. Again, it started with sweat equity, right? And now way beyond that.
Yeah, no, I mean, you make a very good point. I mean, we operate in 4 states in the affordable housing arena, and every state has their own unique approach on how they would like to see housing done. There's the QAPs, which are basically the state's plan on how they would like to prioritize affordable housing in their state. And so we have to learn each state's respective QAP, respective priorities, and make sure that we're consistent and aligned with those. Then, on top of that, the federal housing programs have their own set of rules that we have to follow. So it's always kind of this puzzle where you're trying to piece together the federal, state, and a lot of times even local resources for affordable housing and marry them together in a way that generates a beautiful project that will be an asset to the community and create wonderful homes for families or seniors. And so it's kind of fun in a way because it is problem solving and, like I said, coming up with a new solution for a puzzle. And we do get into the weeds. We have to learn a lot of technical regulations and financial parameters to make sure that whatever we're proposing to do will be consistent and will be aligned with all of the policy goals of all the respective stakeholders. On top of the fact, they have to make financial sense so that our lenders and our investors are also satisfied. So it is a balancing act of trying to create the most balanced, accessible housing for our communities, and at the same time remain feasible for the long term. And I think we've done a good job of that. And we're trying to get that expertise in each state and have it be available when we need it.
Let me ask you a question about kind of those opposing questions, right? One is questions about diversity, and the other one is about commonality, right? On the diversity side, I'm thinking about our peers and out of the industry, right? And they have the luxury or the benefit of being having a much smaller geographic footprint. So the people that they need to have relationships with, our elected officials, for example, are pretty limited, right? We have a huge spread. So in terms of diversity, how do you see that in terms of adding to the complications of development, right? Where you have to keep relationships with a wide spectrum of elected officials and city officials. How does that work?
Well, again, I think that's one of those classic two-edged swords, right? It is a challenge because you need to learn every community's priorities and nuances and what works and what doesn't work. But the other edge of the sword is that you're able to expand your knowledge and able to master those commonalities across different areas. So if we have a best practice in, say, Arizona, that we learned something and this really worked well. Sometimes we can take those lessons to other states and they have never seen that before. And then we say, we could do something similar in your community. And they look at that and go, you know what? That's a pretty great idea. And we'd like to see you guys do that. And so I think that, like I said, it's a balancing act where it is more challenging in one way, but it's also liberating because it gives you more breadth, if you will, and diversity of options that you can pursue.
Yeah, as you're talking, I'm thinking about the La Plaza Mula example, right? Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so La Plaza was an interesting project we did in Los Angeles where we partnered with Trammell Crow, which is a for-profit developer. We were able to create a large-scale project that provided much needed housing, both market rate and affordable, in downtown Los Angeles. It also provided almost 50,000 square feet of retail space, and again, an area that historically is underserved. And it did so without any public subsidy. And it was done through creative financing, both market rate and public contributions in the form of a below market lease. And also took advantage of underutilized land in a metropolitan area, which in this case, these sites were parking lots. So we were able to replace the public parking that we took, and we were able to create 355 units of housing in an area that had no activity, no commercial activity, no liveliness at all. And now you have retail, you have housing, you still have the parking, which I know is very critical for a lot of people in downtown.
Yeah.
But and you leverage a public asset and make it so much more.
But talk about the impact on the museum.
Well, and that too. So the museum, which is adjacent to the parking lots, this was parking for the museum, now gets a lease payment that is for 88 years. That helps support their operations as a cultural institution in downtown LA. So again, you're creating vibrancy. You're providing the resources for the museum. You're also providing households who can take advantage of all that resource and can go visit the museum. You're creating retail that also complements the museum and creates a more lively downtown dynamic. So there was just so many wins on this project. And I think it's one that we would love to replicate. And we think we're going to be doing that again in Long Beach, California, with the MOLA site, which is another museum that also has some excess land that we may be able to do a similar kind of project. And we think that this platform or model is something that we could replicate in a lot of areas.
Yeah. That's an awesome project. Going back to the previous question, right, and now the commonality question, right? A portion of the question is, you've had the benefit of going through many communities now the last 10 years with us, and as you talk to future residents or talk to city officials that really have a connection with the residents themselves and talk about the needs that they're facing, do you see any commonalities out there that speak to you in terms of what are people going through no matter where you are in the Southwest?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, that is the issue, right? That there is overwhelming demand for affordable housing throughout the United States, but also particularly in our communities in the Southwest. And what you'll see is there's that commonality of that need, that desire to have a safe place to live, have your family live, have your children thrive. And so everyone wants pretty much the same thing, which is to be able to participate in the American dream, which is to, move up the economic ladder, have a safe place to live, have good schools for your children to attend, and just have hope for the future. And one of the things that I think impacts me and how I think about it is when we go into new communities and we say we're the Cesar Chavez Foundation, people get excited because that name resonates with so many folks about what we're about, what our founder was about, and what, that integrity, the idea that they're going to do something really well, and it's going to really help people in this community. And so we already have that cachet, and we're trying to really start to leverage that into more opportunities. And again, I think with that track record that we've developed and showing the results and the successes that we've already had, I think that the future is going to be even better because I think people want it. The demand is absolutely there.
Well, you talk about the future, and I know that we've spent a lot of time over the course of the last 2 or 3 years revamping HED's future, kind of creating a vision for what it can do. Can you share with us, what excites you about what's coming up, right? For HED?
Well, it's the idea of scale, right?
Yeah.
We're trying to scale ourselves to a point where we can be developing up to 2,000 units a year. Historically, we were doing one project every few years. And right now, currently in 2021, we have 7 projects in our construction, which is fantastic. I think we can double that in the next few years in terms of having that level of activity in the Southwest. And I think it's a testament to the team, the professionalism of it, the girth of the organization, and what it brings to those problems that we can help solve in those communities. And I think that financial acumen is really starting to pay off for us as well, in terms of really being smart on how we leverage our resources and how we go after developments. I think the scale of projects we're doing are much larger. As I mentioned, La Plaza was a fairly large project, and we have two others that we're working on in pre-development that are going to be significantly larger than that. One in North Hollywood and another one again in Long Beach that potentially could be very large. So yeah, I think it's all just growing exponentially, really. And what we're trying to do is just be smart about it, make sure that we keep the mission always first and foremost in our minds in terms of how we approach our projects, and to make sure that that goal of really having a positive impact in the community still is the first and foremost idea we have.
Yeah. You're blessed in the sense that the housing work that the foundation does through you and your team is pretty extensive, right? It's had a long history, a good history, and you're very far down the road in terms of strengthening and adding to Cesar's legacy every day, right? And but as you know, the Cesar's legacy is also being marshaled by two other programs: our education fund and our communications fund, and of course the folks that protect and promote Cesar's legacy. Do you have any kind of any guiding words to those VPs, your peers, that are also facing tremendous responsibility, right, for carrying on the legacy, but at the same time kind of trying to grow their operations, right, to a level that is way beyond what they currently have and more similar to yours. So I guess from the perspective of how do we grow a housing legacy, any advice you want to give your peers?
I think dream big or be bold. Think about what you want to accomplish first. Then you can do the planning and the organizational work that you have to do to get you there. I think being ambitious in that way helps guide your thinking and helps guide you in terms of what you're looking to do within your respective organization. Again, I mentioned we had a skeleton crew when I first came on board, because we had to be thoughtful about budgets and we had to be thoughtful about, profitability for the organization. But we knew what we wanted to do. We knew we wanted to grow substantially. We knew that we could if we could get certain things put in place. And so that vision was the first part. And then the actual planning and working on infrastructure and kind of like looking at what are the steps that we have to take came second. It wasn't the other way around. And I think that helped a lot. It really allowed us to start thinking much bigger. And saying, instead of why not, it was more like why and how can we? And I think that's the whole point, which is you want to have that attitude, which is, si se puede, we can do this. Yeah. We just got to be thoughtful and put the things in place to make ourselves successful.
It's very consistent with what we know of Cesar, right? I didn't have the pleasure of meeting him, but from everything that I've heard, he worked the same way, right? He worked based on vision, and who knew that a union for farm workers would actually be viable, right? I'm sure he read a lot of history, and he didn't see a lot of good things there, but he had a vision. And he made it work with a lot of hard work. So I think that's what we're all facing, and I think I think that while the housing or the education, the communications work is part of that legacy, part of our legacy, rightly, is to carry on that attitude, that the attitude, perseverance, right, and do what we think is impossible, and making it happen for the benefit of people that really need it the most.
Exactly. Yeah, and again, it's being able to look at your work, seeing the tangible results. I think that's, obviously with Cesar and the union, with us, we get to see the physical aspects of our work, and I think that's always inspirational for the team. To see the people there enjoying it, to see the impacts it has in the neighborhood, to see public officials become excited and see that there is opportunity and hope if people work together. So all that is wonderful stuff.
Yeah. Well, Alfredo, thank you very much for joining me in this conversation. Thank you very much for giving us a brief summary of where you've taken the housing and economic development team over the last 10 years and where you plan on taking them over the next 10 years. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure.